Hey folks, Professor Finn here, and today we're going to be looking at Chapter 12 in Ralph Klicker's Funeral Service Psychology and Counseling. Let's go ahead and get the presentation up on the screen and talk about essential interpersonal skills. It is not only necessary to have good interpersonal skills, but it is imperative to communicate the respect, warmth, genuine integrity, and sincerity to the client. They can hear what you're saying, but that doesn't mean it's believable. So with verbal communication, we're talking about spoken oral communication, and within that, your tone of your voice, your talking speed, and your voice inflections. Nonverbal communication is all the other things. That which is expressed by posture, facial expression, actions, or physical behavior, communication by any other means than verbally. Smiling, frowning, gestures, facial expression, eye movement, body position, and movement. Email is considered a very impersonal way to communicate because you may say something in email and people add context to the words that maybe should not be added. And that is because they do not have the interaction by seeing what it is that you are doing. Now, in the lectures that I provide now, later in life, I have a little box in the corner that shows me actually lecturing to you so you can see my mannerisms and gestures. Early lectures I posted on this channel are simply just the lecture themselves with an audio overdub. There is something more to be added when you have a person talking to you and seeing what it is that they are doing. While the client is analyzing the verbal and nonverbal cues, the counselor is also observing the client for these external manifestations of their internal feelings and emotions. The big difference is that the client's analysis is usually on a subconscious level, while the counselor is trained to be aware of the subtle and not so subtle components of communication. I will tell you a universal truth of being a funeral director making arrangements. Everybody lies. Everybody lies about something. It is important that when someone makes a statement that you are observing them in case there is something that flags you as to, we need to explore that. And it might be something innocent. So for instance, if I ask the question, well, how many children did your mom have? People are usually pretty quick to say, oh, well, I have 3 siblings. So you have 3 brothers and sisters. Yes. That would be a red flag for me. Why did it take you that long to say yes? And when I asked you how many children, you responded with, this is how many siblings I have. The way I would approach this as a professional hearing something like that is add in maybe a question, was your mom ever previously married? Does your mom have any children from a previous marriage? Because in the state of Florida, any biological child sits on the same level as any other biological child when it comes to authorizing or denying a cremation, which creates issues. So a good way to get ahead of that is to find out, well, you have 3 siblings, blood siblings, but you may have another 2 half-siblings, or you don't view them as siblings. How many children does your mom, dad, whoever have? So how they respond to questions, what words they use, the type of mannerisms, people looking at each other, all those sort of things can be a trigger that you need to explore that as a funeral professional. Most states have something like a Good Samaritan law that allows a funeral director to rely on information provided to them during the course of their duties. And if something is given to us incorrectly, that is not our fault. However, if you know and your BS detector is going off and you choose to ignore that, then you are likely not going to be covered by that Good Samaritan law, and you knowingly chose to subvert it by not inquiring or pushing or finding out, which would be a violation of your due diligence. Giving undivided attention by means of verbal and nonverbal behavior is a very necessary attending skill. There are also other methods of letting the client know she is being understood and empathized with, but really, undivided attention is pretty strong. It says something when someone is talking to you at the table, and the next thing you know, so I hear what you're saying, Mrs. Smith. It's really sorry that your husband passed away, and we're here to help you at the funeral home. Give me just a second. What type of message does that send? And you might say, well, Professor Finn, no one would ever do something like that. Well, you're right. No one would sit here on the phone doing what I'm doing to you right now, where I'm looking at it and I'm opening and I'm swiping things closed and whatnot to illustrate a point. But something they might do when this happens is they may choose to look at their watch because they know they have other appointments coming in, and this person came in and now has interrupted their flow for the day. That could be problematic. Other ways that could happen is to be spacing out and looking at something because you've heard this now for the 4th or 5th time today. You're tired, you're exhausted, you're on a 36-hour work shift, and whatever. Giving undivided attention by means of verbal and nonverbal behavior, looking at people when you are talking to them, is very important. I do not know how many people are going to be looking at this video over the course of my life or even after my life ends. That's the beauty of putting something on the internet. It's there forever. But there is a difference between me looking at the webcam, looking at the video reduction, and looking at the presentation. And if I am talking to you off script, so to speak, I don't need to be looking at the presentation or the off screen. There is a more meaningful connection when I look at you through the camera where you perceive that I am looking at you, when realistically I'm looking at a Logitech 922. Active listening, attentively listening to the words a client says, observing the nonverbal clues such as eye contact, posture, facial expressions, gestures, and being sensitive to the tone, inflection, speed, and intensity of what is being said. Again, everybody lies. And that doesn't mean they're trying to harm you. It doesn't mean they are trying to be subversive. It means that they probably don't think that whatever the complicating factor is needs to be addressed. And realistically, it needs to be addressed. Which is why you have to pick up on those things, those subtle pauses, those glances across the tables, and just ask, something's concerning you there. So what is it that's concerning you? Because let's get ahead of it. If you make a bad decision, if you choose not to tell me something, that can create an issue for you down the line. One of the things I had to deal with is a family not knowing if their mom or dad were married. So I had a situation early in my career where family came in. It was a second marriage, and both sets of children, the husband's children and the wife's children, were making arrangements on the surviving parent. So, turns out they never got married. They never got married. And the problem is a death certificate says they're married. They have no marriage license. And when you are unmarried, that completely changes the estate distribution. So this creates a problem. So now, what I ask whenever I make an arrangement, I haven't made arrangements in years, is, were your parents legally married? Well, we don't really know. Well, that's a problem. You need to know that. I always ask that question going forward because there were more than a handful of instances where, when asking the question, that I might get a response that causes me to stop. And I have to say, now that is a very important piece of information, because if we have to correct it later, that's going to take a court order. So we have to know what to put in that box. Again, informational counseling. I'm not asking because I care that there's some family drama going on here and no one knows who's married to what. But if we check the wrong box, that's going to create huge problems for whoever's administrating the estate and disbursement of the estate, etc. You don't want to get into that. You really, really don't want to get into that. Verbal and nonverbal communication should be consistent with each other. Contradictions in verbal, nonverbal are cues that further exploration is necessary. I love watching these movies where someone's trying to sell someone over the phone. They can't really see what they're doing. They're sitting there playing with their pencil, or they're sitting there flicking off their coworker, or whatever's happening while they're engaged in the phone conversation. Well, if we saw what they were behaving like while they were talking to us, we probably would not continue engaging in the conversation. Everything has to match. Like I said, everybody lies. And they're trying to do that maybe in an innocent fashion. But when you catch it, you're going to want to talk about it. Paraphrasing, focusing on and repeating back to the client the key words used, usually the most important part of what was said. This lets the client know that you heard and understood what was said in a shortened or alternative form. If you can paraphrase something, you know it, which means you were listening. Paraphrasing is very, very important. Reflecting, the counselor expressing in fewer or fresh words the essential feelings stated or strongly implied by the counselee in their words or nonverbal communication. Uses opening statements such as, "You seem to feel," "sounds like," "I sense you are feeling," followed by a question, "Is that right? Is that close?" Clarifying, the process of getting a better understanding of something the client has said. This increased understanding cannot always be obtained just by paraphrasing or reflecting. It is a more direct approach than paraphrasing or reflecting. Now, for examination purposes, they're probably not going to give you a sentence and ask you what is happening here. What they are going to ask you is, what is this definition? What word would be applied to what you are reading here? So that is the most important thing, that when you are given the definition of what these things are, don't try to split hairs whether it's going to be paraphrasing or clarifying. Know what the difference is in the definition. Perception checking, very similar to clarifying. The counselor needs further explanation from the client to ensure they completely understand what was said. Leading, the skill of encouraging the client to further explore what you feel is a major issue, more or less anticipating where the client is going. That can be very useful for a funeral director to lead a client into a conversation. That does not mean you are selling them something. It means you are exploring something that may have some serious meaning in a funeral service ceremony. I had a situation where we're talking about employment. And I don't remember the specifics of what happened, but they had said, my dad only worked for a couple of months there. Don't think that maybe it needs to be listed. And I said, okay, well, maybe we don't put that in the paid obituary, but how about we just go ahead and leave that in the free obituary we're going to put on our website. And because you thought enough about it to bring it up in conversation, was there anything really good about that experience that your dad told you about? And they started gushing about this, 1 6 or 7 month job, of how much fun their dad had, blah, 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 blah. Cool. And it just so happened that a coworker of their dad's saw the online obituary, came and started sharing some stories during the open comments, personal sharing time, about their dad at that job that they had no idea about. All because I wanted to say, hey, let's explore that a bit more. What are some cool things there? And really, I was trying to find something maybe I could do in the chapel, or something I could set up, or maybe an old poster for the radio station or something. Like, I want more information there. Maybe there's something cool that I can do to surprise the family. And it so happened that this guy was a coworker and remembered his coworker fondly and wanted to come to his funeral and wish his family well, and share some really cool stories. Informing. We do this a lot. Sharing knowledge you have with the client. Technique most funeral directors feel comfortable with because they are the expert about what is involved in funerals and the families need to know this information. Questioning. Using skillful probing questions to clarify the counselor's understanding but also aids the client in exploring their thoughts and feelings. Use open-ended questions which begin with how, what, or can. There are a lot of things that trainers will bring up in arranger excellence seminars. One of the big ones is that you always use open-ended questions. When you think of your dad, what comes to mind? If we were doing this, how would your brother respond? Let them talk. You want them to talk because the more they talk, the more information you're getting. And as I've said earlier, everybody lies. You might catch someone in a faux pas. You may catch them making a misleading statement. The number of siblings that pop up out of nowhere through careful questioning will be surprising when you're making cremation arrangements. And if you're in one of those states where every one of those people has to sign off, you really need to know how many people exist and need to sign off. Summarizing. Bringing together the different aspects of your counseling session into a succinct review of what has occurred. You should do summarizing at the conclusion of your arrangements conference. And you should summarize all of the things in the timeline on a piece of paper to give to the family to take home with them so they see what the order of events and dates are. The allowance of silence. Silence gives the client and the counselor time to reflect and be aware of feelings. Silence is a very, very important and useful tool. I am lucky I come from a stage background. Things like to happen on stage. And with an opera background, there's lots of noise on stage. What's equally as important is when there is no noise. Silence can be extremely effective. Verbal communication. Use a natural voice. Use a non-threatening tone. Don't talk too fast or too slow. This is why you want to practice talking. Because inherently you're going to want to talk fast because sometimes you have to get through things, and you see this in my lectures all the time where I'm just prattling on and on and on and on and on and on and on. So practice slowing it down. I promise you, if you talk slow in a practice, by the time you are communicating, it will be at normal speed because you will have the adrenaline of talking to someone kicking in and doing what it has to do. So I'm a big fan of people working on their speech techniques to be able to talk to clients effectively. Stay on the topic the client brings up. Don't interrupt. Give client all the time they need to answer. Do not preach or lecture, and do not talk too much about yourself. This is not a YouTube lecture. Could I spend hours and hours and hours talking about all the different things, the different types of... Absolutely. Funeral directors have more stories than we care to admit. But realistically, whatever I tell you, whatever I present here for posterity, proverbially, I want to focus directly on something that is of immediate use to the lecture at hand, not some random story about something cool that happened at a funeral that one time. I will tell you it's extremely important because people can drift from the topic. I see this in the job all the time that I work now. We start talking about one thing, and all of a sudden we ended up on a three-way removed tangent. And then you have to bring it all the way back. You hear this from trainer, let's bring it back to what was at hand. And I've gotten I think I've gotten way better than I used to be at saying, whoa, hold on a second. Now we're going down here. And when people are at the table and they're bringing up all these tangents, like, okay, hold on a second. There are three things here we need to talk about. This one, with this one. We can't put these all together, so let's give adequate time to each and every one of these things that we are going to talk about. Maintain eye contact, but do not stare. Be culturally sensitive. Looking at certain genders and certain faith systems and certain ethnic communities is not well received by members of opposite genders. And very eye contact is necessary. So if there are 3 people at the table, if someone is talking and you are responding to them, make sure you look at them. So you're not looking at Mrs. Smith while you're responding to a question that her son said over here to the left somewhere and just basically brushing him right off. That nonverbal communication is pretty poor. Your body posture should be slouching. Avoid slouching, but be relaxed. Present open posture facing the client. Lean forward to exhibit sincerity and interest. Sit on the same level as the individual. Do not stand over them. Head nods. The occasional head nod demonstrate agreement and encourage the client to continue to communicate. Facial expressions appear natural, relaxed, and caring. Arm and leg position. Arms should be at your side or in a position to have your hands in your lap. Do not cross your arms or legs in front of you. It creates distance when you do that. It blocks you off. Negative nonverbal skills. A very rigid posture. Taking notes without looking at people when they're talking. Clock watching, letting your gaze wander. If I'm in a sensitive situation and I know I'm going to be taking notes, or there's the possibility of me taking notes, I'm going to state right up front. Folks, ladies and gentlemen, everyone, teammates, please understand, I have a notepad here to my right, especially when I'm on camera. And if you see me looking down and writing, understand that I am taking notes. I am not ignoring you. I am not being insensitive. I am writing something down that moment so that I do not forget it later. That's right at the front, because I know that even if I don't write a single note, when I'm doing this, if I'm already in a kind of hot situation, me looking down and writing something could be interpreted as, oh, look, you're not even paying attention to us now. It's not the message you want to send. So you have to develop these interpersonal skills. They don't happen by magic. There are 5 steps to this. Step 1 is awareness of ignorance. Ignorance is not negative. It means that the person is aware that they need improvement. Stage 2 takes action, obtains education. Usually this is the basic level. Some learners will take an advanced course afterwards to increase their knowledge base. Stage 3 starts the good, better, best analogy. You begin trying out the newly acquired skills. This is awkwardness and discomfort because you're in the good stage. You're not the best at it. You're not natural. You've done something more than just your basic research. Now you're starting to apply this. It's uncomfortable. There is a better stage. Individual feels more comfortable, but it's still conscious. You still have to put some effort into it. It doesn't happen naturally under muscle memory. I will try the skill now and see how it works. And then the best level of practice, now it's muscle memorized, effective in practicing the attending skills without even realizing it. It is natural and automatic. Different people need to spend different amounts of time to make those things happen. It's that simple. But it does not happen by magic. And you get better at talking to people by talking, in listening to yourself talk so that you can hear where things are going right and where things are going wrong. You have to be very critical of yourself. So a lot of people do not see the value in that. A lot of people do not believe in that. You have to hear yourself to hear where things are going wrong. Going from 1 to 5 takes time, education, and experience. It means practicing, refining, modifying behaviors if necessary, and practicing some more. Continuing education will become a part of your life. That concludes this lecture, folks, and we will see you next video.